Okay, so Elon Musk is supposed to leave at the end of
Mm,
May or something.
yeah.
What is your assessment on the whole role the Doge played? Did it do any, I mean, does it change anything? Does it play any significant role to change American for the better or something? What is your assessment on that?
My own assessment of Doge is that it's essentially failed. I mean, the fact that Elon Musk is leaving the scene, quitting the scene, is a clear sign that the bureaucracy has won. I mean, any idea that an institution like Doge has achieved its objectives in 130 days is ridiculous, given the size of the American government. So it is the defeat of Elon Musk and the defeat of the key part of Trump's reform agenda.
Mhm.
But what Doge did achieve, and it's important, but not in terms of American internal developments, but for those of us who follow the United States and those in foreign governments that need to understand the United States, is that it briefly pulled the curtain. So we saw an awful lot about the internal realities of how the American government works. The fact that its budget is completely out of control, for example, and will continue to be. The fact that it is overspending recklessly, which is the real cause, by the way, of America's problems, not China's competition or anything of that kind. Jeffrey Sachs has written to me about this, and we're going to do a program with him. He said that America will very soon have a deficit again, a trade deficit again,
Mhm.
despite the fact that it's putting up all of these tariffs, because it chronically overspends. And that overspending can only be satisfied by an insatiable demand of goods from outside.
Mhm.
That's why. So anyway, uh, um, we've seen the curtain drawn. We've seen how out of control, how profoundly corrupt the American system has become. It will provide food for analysts and historians, uh, extending far into the future. But in terms of American politics and American policy, it's been an episode which has changed nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if nothing else, if you look at the what Trump, he can't even like just keep the level of military spending the same. He has to
No,
increase it, right? So I
exactly.
think just that alone, I think it tells you
Yes,
how much Doge has failed. Yeah.
yes.
And not to mention, I think Elon Musk himself personally paid some price for it, right? His
Oh,
company is
yeah.
not doing well, so and people hate him. You know, there's a huge,
Yeah.
a lot of people hate him.
Well,
So
there's been a massive, vicious campaign against him,
yeah,
which has
yeah.
had its effect. I mean,
Mhm.
I've seen cars, Teslas, in London with people putting pictures on them. I think I hate Elon too. I
Mm.
mean, because people are afraid for their cars, which is bizarre actually.
Yeah, yeah,
But it's had that effect.
yeah. Now, on the Democratic side, so we talked about this that there is no real leader in the Democratic Party now. So
Mm,
one thing happened is Cory Booker, the the senator from New Jersey, he did this filibuster for 25
mm,
hours straight talk. Now it's very impressive that he's doing that right without a break. He was just standing there talking. But here's my question. Now, filibuster, my understanding is if there is a bill that is going to go for a vote, you do the filibuster to stop the vote because you hate it so much and yet you know you don't have the vote to vote against it. So this is your way as a minority to express your
mm,
frustration, your determination to stop the bill.
mm.
He didn't even have a bill. He just talked.
No,
Talk
no,
about
exactly.
how bad, Trump is and Doge is and the Republican Party is. So he just keep on talking. So is this just a purely political theater to get attention? Is that what he's doing?
That's exactly what he's doing. That is all it is. There is manoeuvring within the Democratic Party as to who's going to be the great leader, who's going to take the cause forward in 2028, and that's what Cory Booker has done. He's put himself politically on the map. Here in London, by the way, the people who want to see a Democrat challenge in 2028 are in ecstasies about this. There have been euphoric articles about, this heroic man who did this extraordinary thing, spoke for 25 hours, telling us all about what a terrible man Donald Trump is. There it is.
The filibuster itself, I find it interesting. Now, does Britain have something similar, just so the minority can stop a bill? I mean, that's the whole
No,
purpose of filibuster. So Britain
yes,
doesn't have
no,
one.
no, it
Okay,
doesn't.
so it's a
The Parliament is very tightly controlled here. I mean, disregard the fact that when you see film of Parliament, I mean, you see all these people, heckling and shouting and all of that. But there are very, very tight rules about what you can do. And the Speaker of the House of Commons, who is in charge of enforcing the rules, if somebody tries to do something like that, engage in a filibuster, they will simply ask him to leave the room, and he will be escorted out. So it can't happen. Absolutely not. In Britain, the government, provided it has a majority, controls the House of Commons.
Mhm. Okay. I mean, it's an interesting phenomenon. So I had an episode to tell my audience to explain, what this is. It
Yeah.
got lots of attention simply because people,
Mm.
very impressed by him standing there for 25 straight hours, just physically very demanding, right? But what's the purpose? You need to have a purpose to do something like that. And so anyway, um,
It serves, it's pure politics, it's pure theatre. It's politics reduced to performance art.
yeah.
That's all it is.
Okay, Europe. One thing that the Russian media reported that the former Italian Prime Minister Massimo D'Alema, he supposedly
Yeah.
at the request of Zelensky went to China and Brazil to seek
Mm.
help. This was last year, before I think the election even. So even at that point, it seems like Zelensky knew that America will sooner or later stop
Mm.
supporting Ukraine, and he didn't trust the Europeans. So he knew what is coming, right? What is your
Mm.
take on that?
Yeah. Oh, it's a very interesting development, actually. And it's interesting, by the way, that he didn't go himself or send a Ukrainian official. He found a former Italian politician to
Mhm.
act as his messenger, which points to the fact that he's come to realize that Ukrainian diplomats aren't very good, and that somebody's told him that he himself doesn't go down very well with
Mhm.
some foreign leaders. Now, China and Brazil formed this Friends of Peace group at the United Nations. They have been coordinating their positions on trying to work out a Ukrainian settlement. And of course, they're both BRICS member states. And the Russians see both of these countries as friends, especially China, but also Brazil.
Mhm.
So it's understandable that Zelensky would say to himself, well, look, the Americans may change soon. I am losing the war because he
Mhm.
is. I am. I've seen that the Europeans can't offer me something. I've got to try and put pressure on the Russians, or at least get somebody to talk to the Russians, to bring the Russians to the table. And who better than China and Brazil, who have this influence over Russia? The trouble is, Zelensky sends these envoys, and as I said, it's interesting that he chose an Italian one. Um, but they never come with anything that leaders in China and Brazil, or indeed even the United States now, can really use,
Mhm.
because he's never willing to make any real compromise on anything. He
Mhm.
still demands all the territories. He still demands that Ukraine be allowed to enter NATO. He insists that the Russians should at some point pay reparations, that they should agree to their generals and even Putin himself being put on trial. He's never really, well, he never has, not really, he never has retreated from any of this. So it seems that Lula actually refused to meet this man.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, that's what I read, that Lula is basically saying this is the problem the United States, you and the United States should deal
Yeah.
with. We're not part of that. And China seems nicer to them to but China pretty much have the same message, you need to know what you need to you need to do, right?
Yeah.
You need to be able
But
to compromise before you talk to us. Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
absolutely. Well, of course, the Chinese have infinite patience.
Mm.
And they are, by the way, contrary to all the wolf warrior nonsense that you hear about, they are very polite people.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
the degree of self restraint that you see from
Yeah.
Chinese diplomats is extraordinary, all things considered. Much more self restrained, by the way, than the Russians are. The
Hmm.
Russians can
Hmm.
be pretty bullying at times, just to say, or at
Yeah.
least bombastic at times. The Chinese are not.
Yeah.
Um, in Brazil, it's different. Now, Lula has apparently he has never forgiven an incident that happened at a G7 meeting in, I think it was Tokyo, and I think it was in
Mm-hmm.
2023, which is that Lula and Modi had been invited to this G7 meeting, and as had Zelensky. And Zelensky asked to meet Modi and Lula, and Modi and Lula agreed to meet him and put aside time to meet him. So Zelensky met Modi, and apparently the meeting went very badly. And then Lula was waiting to meet Zelensky, and Zelensky didn't turn up. And Lula was apparently furious about this
Mm-hmm.
and has never forgiven Zelensky for it, and has never received an apology from Zelensky about it either, by the way.
Yeah. Sometimes you wonder what they're thinking, right? And how can you do something like
Yeah.
that and not
I mean,
apologize?
you exactly. I mean, Zelensky has been pretty rude to the
Yeah.
Chinese as well. I mean,
Yeah.
he's been, but as I said, China seems to have this ability to just absorb this
Uh-huh.
and nonetheless keep going. How long they'll do it is another question, of course.
One thing, the other day I saw somewhere what I found interesting is that Marco Rubio being the Secretary of State. You know, he is now currently sanctioned by both China and Russia. So how can you conduct
Oh, really?
how, how can he conduct, diplomacy when he is now sanctioned both by China and Russia? How does it work?
Well, there you go. How does it work exactly? I mean, the Americans never think of these things. I mean, they always assume that everybody wants to talk to them. Um, I remember again that there was a. This is back in Obama's time that Putin was invited to attend a meeting where Obama was, and that Obama. This is before, actually I remember now. Medvedev was the president. Putin. No, it was the other way around. Anyway,
Mhm.
Putin didn't go, and he sent his prime minister, who was Medvedev instead. And the Americans were stunned. They were shocked that a foreign leader didn't want to meet the president of the United States. He would turn down an invitation. So this is very much the American attitude that everybody must speak to us. Everybody yearns to speak to us. If Kim Jong Un has a meeting
Mhm.
with the American President Donald Trump, this is somehow a massive benefit extended by the Americans to Kim Jong Un. The mere fact that he's having a meeting is a benefit. That the rest of the world doesn't actually think like that is something that Americans never can bring themselves to understand.
Well, what I don't understand is like Marco Rubio, the reason he was sanctioned by China is he was lying about what happened in Xinjiang. And that, of course, China take it very seriously. I think he did that when he probably was still as a senator. And then even recently, he was lying. He was talking about he visited I forgot which country in Africa. And he said those train was built by China and it was so bumpy that he almost threw up or something like that. Turns out that railroad was not built by China. And that African country even said that that's not built by China. But
Yeah,
he just this and he didn't apologize. He didn't say, "Oops, I got it wrong." No, he didn't apologize for any of that.
no.
He just kept on lying. So does he understand what diplomacy really means? And he's now under sanction. He should be at least not make it worse, right? He doesn't care.
Americans have no understanding what diplomacy means. Now, I don't want to go through all of the negotiations that have taken place over the last few weeks between the Americans and the Russians, but the Russians, who do understand diplomacy, I mean, they do it all the time, obviously, they are absolutely bewildered by it. I mean, they really are. I mean, meetings are convened, and the Americans come without any kind of preparation or agenda. This is apparently what happened at the first Russian American meeting. The second one, the Russians discovered that the Americans had invited the Ukrainians to turn up without telling them in advance. Um, Anybody who tries to conduct diplomacy with the Americans finds it's all but impossible, because the Americans, who did once upon a time do diplomacy, I mean, Kissinger did diplomacy.
Mhm.
Kissinger did diplomacy when he came to China in the early 70s. But today, the Americans have completely lost those skills. What I am saying now is open. I've said it on programs, but I have some. I didn't speak to anybody directly in the American government, but I do speak to some people who are connected to the
Mhm.
American government. And I said, look, if you cannot find diplomats who were able to conduct negotiations. If you don't know how to do diplomacy, then here's a suggestion. Why don't you speak to some of the old veterans who did? People
Hmm.
like Chas Freeman, for
Hmm.
example,
Hmm.
and get their advice. And also, why don't you go to the big law firms and start recruiting some lawyers?
Hmm.
Because diplomacy has something like litigation, because litigation involves an awful lot of negotiation. And they're not going to be as good as diplomats, but at least they have some of the skills
Hmm.
and maybe they can build up some more.
Hmm.
Um, because America doesn't have a clue how to conduct diplomacy.
Hmm.
And lying, I'm afraid, is something that the Americans have been doing for a very, very
Yeah.
long time. And they do it constantly. And I mean, Putin even once said that they're the empire of lies. It's true enough.
It's true. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I don't know what Marco Rubio is thinking, right? He's now sanctioned by both Russia and China. And if I were him, I would try to mitigate, trying to be softer. So hopefully those two countries can, considering lift the sanction. No, he's doubling down. He's making it
Yeah,
worse. I,
yeah.
anyway.
Well, absolutely. I should say there's one of the earliest manuals on how to conduct diplomacy, written by a French diplomat at the beginning of the 18th century when European diplomacy was first starting. He said, whatever you do, never lie. Never lie if you're a
Yeah.
diplomat. He
Yeah.
said, sometimes if you lie, you will gain a temporary advantage,
Hmm.
but you will always leave poison behind you.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is, as I said, that's one of the earliest rules of diplomacy. Does anybody pay any attention in America? No.
No. Yeah.